The rising sun crept through the window cracks as Manny Pacquiao observed his calloused hands, silent witnesses to countless battles in the rings that had transformed him into a living legend of world boxing. Those same hands that had knocked down champions now trembled slightly as they held the yellowed photograph of his childhood in General Santos, Philippines, when hunger was his most faithful companion and the dream of a better future seemed unattainable. In his luxurious hotel room in Manila, the contrast between his present abundance and his past scarcity stirred a whirlwind of emotions in the fighter. Manny had overcome extreme poverty, slept on the streets, and sold cigarettes to survive, memories that never abandoned him even after winning 8 world titles in different categories and accumulating considerable fortune. On the television playing in the background, a report about the local children's hospital showed children fighting cancer, their eyes shining with fragile hope while their families despaired to bear the costs of treatments. The image of a boy approximately 7 years old, with a shaved head and a persistent smile even amid pain, captured the boxer's attention, reminding him of himself as a child. Small in size, but giant in determination. The next charity boxing event Manny would organize was scheduled for a month from now, with tickets already sold out and prestigious sponsors confirmed, promising to be the biggest sporting event of the year in the Philippines. Traditionally, part of the proceeds went to social works, while another significant portion remunerated the fighters and covered operational costs, a common practice in the sports world. On that quiet morning, however, something changed within the champion's heart as he observed those children fighting their own battle against an opponent much more relentless than any adversary he had ever faced in the ring. A decision began to form in his mind, an idea that his advisors would certainly consider risky or even imprudent, but which for Manny seemed the only possible choice in the face of the suffering of those little warriors. The meeting room of PACQUIAO Promotions was filled with executives, sponsors, and advisors when Manny entered with determined steps and a serenity that contrasted with the usual excitement of the weeks preceding major events. Those present immediately fell silent, respecting the presence of the man who was not only their boss but a national and international icon, someone whose trajectory inspired millions of people around the world. The boxer walked to the head of the table and, without prior warning, announced his decision. All proceeds from the next Fists of Hope event would be entirely allocated to the treatment of children with cancer at the National Children's Hospital of Manila. There would be no profit sharing, no exceptions. Every penny raised from tickets, broadcasting rights, and sponsorships would be converted into a chance at life for those who had barely begun their journey in this world. The faces around the table expressed a mixture of surprise, admiration, and, in some cases, veiled concern about the financial implications of that sudden decision. Some advisors tried to argue about the event's sustainability and commitments already made, but their protests were gently silenced by Manny's determined look, which was not just the look of a boxing champion, but of someone who deeply understood the meaning of the fight for survival. While explaining his vision, Manny did not mention that he himself would cover the operational costs of the event with his personal money, nor that he had spent the entire night secretly visiting the children's hospital, witnessing firsthand the suffering and courage of those children and their families. That night visit, away from the spotlight and cameras, had sealed his determination to transform his next event into something greater than a sports exhibition. It would be an act of love disguised as entertainment. As the meeting progressed and details were discussed, a different energy took over the environment. The initial resistance was gradually replaced by genuine enthusiasm, as if everyone present was being infected by the nobility of that gesture. Even the most pragmatic executives were beginning to realize that they were participating in something extraordinary, something that transcended numbers and marketing strategies to touch the essence of what really mattered. The days following Manny's decision were marked by a silent intensity, as the boxer dedicated himself to training with renewed vigor, as if each drop of sweat shed in the gym was an offering for those children he had never personally met, but whose suffering had deeply touched his heart. His trainer noticed something different in his eyes, a fire that was not just competitiveness, but transcendent purpose. Away from public eyes, Manny faced personal financial challenges that no one but his closest accountant knew. The recent economic crisis had significantly affected his investments, and the decision to donate all event proceeds and still cover operational costs represented a considerable risk to his financial stability. Still, whenever doubt tried to settle in his mind, the image of those children in the hospital was enough to reaffirm his conviction. In his mansion, late at night, the fighter reviewed documents and contracts, seeking ways to maximize fundraising without compromising the quality of the event. Every detail mattered. Every penny saved meant more resources for treatments, medications, and hope. His advisors, initially skeptical, now worked with renewed enthusiasm, infected by the mission that had become larger than the sporting event itself. The news about the total donation of proceeds began to spread, first as a rumor in sporting circles, then as headlines in newspapers, and finally as a wave of commotion on social media. Some people questioned Manny's motivations, suggesting it was just a marketing strategy or a way to improve his public image, especially considering his political ambitions. Criticisms that the boxer listened to in silence, without feeling the need to defend himself. What no one knew, not even his wife Jean Key, was that Manny had visited the children's hospital several times in recent weeks, always discreetly, talking with doctors, nurses, and parents, understanding in detail what those families face daily. The fight against cancer, against the healthcare system, against despair, and mainly, against time that seemed scarce for many of those children whose smiles hid pains unimaginable to most people. As the day of the event approached, the intensity of preparations increased exponentially, with Manny dividing his time between rigorous training and meetings with the organizing team, always attentive to the smallest details that could maximize fundraising. The gymnasium where Fists of Hope would take place was being transformed, with expanded capacity and improved structure to accommodate an even larger audience than initially anticipated. The biggest sponsors in the Philippines, impressed with the initiative, began to increase their contributions, some even doubling the initially agreed values, while new companies expressed interest in associating their brands with the event that was quickly becoming a national phenomenon. The international press began to highlight the story, attracting the attention of celebrities and athletes from other countries who offered to participate or support the cause. On social networks, the hashtag Fists of Hope movement gained impressive strength, with millions of shares and messages of support from all corners of the world, transforming what would be just another sporting event into a true global mobilization for children with cancer. Filipino artists created songs, poems, and artwork inspired by the initiative, further amplifying the reach and emotional impact of the campaign. Meanwhile, at the National Children's Hospital, Medical Director Dr. Santos received a confidential envelope containing an anonymous donation from Manny that would allow the immediate start of treatment for 5 cases considered urgent, without waiting for the event to take place. The children and their families would never know the origin of that sudden miracle that gave them a second chance, and the boxer had been emphatic about the need to maintain his anonymity in that specific action. In the week before the big day, during a particularly strenuous training session, Manny felt a sharp pain in his right shoulder, an old injury resurfacing at the worst possible moment, threatening his participation in the event. Doctors recommended absolute rest and suggested cancelling his main fight, but the champion kept the diagnosis to himself, determined not to allow anything to compromise the success of that mission that had become more important than his own health or comfort. On the eve of the event, Manila's sky was painted with orange tones of sunset when Manny decided to make one last visit to the hospital, this time taking only his trusted driver with him. As he walked through the silent corridors of the pediatric oncology ward, the fighter felt the weight of each step, the responsibility of carrying the hopes of so many families on his shoulders already sore from the injury he hid from everyone. In one of the rooms, a girl of approximately 9 years old, named Maria, was drawing when she noticed the presence of the illustrious visitor. Her large dark eyes, contrasting with the paleness of her face and the absence of hair, lit up with a recognition that transcended fame. It was as if that child could see beyond the public figure, directly into the heart of the man who was there not as a celebrity, but as someone who deeply understood the meaning of the fight for survival. Without exchanging words, just with looks and smiles, a silent connection was established between them that touched Manny more deeply than any conversation could. The girl extended her drawing to the boxer, a simple illustration of a man with boxing gloves surrounded by smiling children, with the phrase, "Our champion," written in colorful and irregular letters, typical of a child who was still learning to write while fighting for her own life. That drawing, carefully folded and kept in the pocket next to his heart, accompanied Manny back to the hotel where his team anxiously awaited him for the last meeting before the big day. The pain in his shoulder seemed more intense, but the determination in his eyes had never been so vivid. It was no longer just an exhibition fight or a charity event. It was a promise silently made to each child like Maria, a promise he would fulfill regardless of the personal price to pay. The night advanced, and, while the final preparations were being completed and his team finally retired to rest, Manny remained alone in his room, contemplating Maria's drawing while applying ice packs to his inflamed shoulder. The tears that silently ran down his face were not from physical pain, but from a deep emotion that mixed gratitude for the opportunity to make a difference, and an almost crushing anguish in the face of those children's suffering. A weight that no world title or fortune could alleviate, but that he was determined to transform into tangible hope. Dawn in Manila brought with it a different energy, almost palpable in the streets that began to fill with people wearing t-shirts with the Fists of Hope event logo. The gymnasium, decorated with white and gold balloons, had been transformed into a temple of solidarity, with each seat sold representing a direct contribution to the treatment of children with cancer, an invisible link between entertainment and genuine compassion. Behind the scenes, Manny fought his own silent battle against the excruciating pain in his shoulder, allowing only his personal physician to know the severity of the situation. An infiltration of painkillers would be necessary for him to enter the ring, a calculated risk that could significantly aggravate the injury, but which the champion was willing to take without hesitation. As the doctor applied the injection, Manny closed his eyes and visualized the face of each child he had met at the hospital, transforming his pain into fuel for the mission ahead. The packed stands vibrated with the energy of thousands of people united by a purpose greater than simple sports entertainment, while celebrities, politicians, and businessmen occupied the reserved seats, many having contributed values well above the original price of tickets. Television cameras broadcast the event to more than 50 countries, exponentially multiplying the reach and impact of that initiative that had begun as a personal decision and now mobilized hearts around the world. When Manny finally emerged for his entrance into the gymnasium, the crowd exploded in a deafening ovation, but what few noticed was the small detail in his outfit. Discreetly sewn onto his boxing shorts was Maria's drawing, transformed into a personal emblem whose true meaning only the champion knew. His steps toward the ring were firm and determined, without any indication of the intense pain that ran through his body with each movement, an invisible sacrifice to the eyes of the public that celebrated his presence. In the center of the ring, before the start of the fights, Manny took the microphone for a brief speech that was not scheduled, his simple and direct words touching the heart of each person present. He spoke not as a celebrity or politician, but as someone who knew hunger and despair, someone who understood the value of a second chance and the importance of extending a hand to those who fought battles invisible to the eyes of the world. When he finished speaking, there wasn't a single dry eye in that gymnasium, and the respectful silence that followed had the weight of a collective prayer, a sacred moment of human connection that transcended any sporting spectacle. The main fight of the night began under the intense spotlights and the vibrant expectation of the crowd, with Manny facing a young and talented opponent who had agreed to participate in the event without receiving a fee, moved by the nobility of the cause. The first rounds were balanced, with both fighters demonstrating technique and mutual respect, but the most attentive eyes could notice that something wasn't right with the champion's right shoulder movement, a subtle limitation that he masked with adjustments to his strategy. In the fourth round, a direct hit to the injured shoulder made Manny feel excruciating pain that almost brought him to the ground, a moment of vulnerability that the crowd interpreted as part of the spectacle, without imagining the true sacrifice happening before their eyes. For a brief instant, the fighter's face revealed the agony he felt, but a mere glance at the first row, where some children from the hospital watched the fight as special guests, was enough for him to find strength to continue. Behind the scenes, doctors observed with concern, aware of the severity of the injury and the risk the boxer was taking by continuing to fight under those conditions. It wasn't just about pain, but a possible permanent damage that could prematurely end his career. Manny's trainer discreetly suggested ending the fight, arguing that the event was already a guaranteed success and that the champion's health should be a priority, advice that was politely ignored. As the rounds progressed, Manny's determination seemed to grow inversely proportional to his physical conditions, as if each drop of pain was transformed into a transcendent form of energy that kept him standing, fighting not only against his opponent in the ring, but against limitations that would have defeated most men. His adapted technique, predominantly using his left arm, impressed the experts and confused his adversary, who did not understand the unusual strategy. The most emotional moment of the night came in the penultimate round, when Manny, gathering forces that seemed to come from a place beyond normal human capacity, connected a perfect sequence of blows that brought his opponent to the canvas, provoking an explosion of joy in the stands and tears on the faces of the children who watched in wonder at the one who fought for them with a courage that transcended sport. The victory, decreed by the referee upon counting to 10, symbolized much more than a sporting triumph. It was the materialization of hope, resilience, and the transforming power of a purpose greater than any personal challenge. After the end of the event, while the crowd still celebrated in the stands, Manny was discreetly taken to the medical room, where he finally allowed his shoulder to be examined without the restrictions imposed by the secrecy he had maintained until then. The diagnosis confirmed his doctor's fear. The injury had significantly worsened and complex surgery would be necessary, with a recovery period that could extend for months, potentially compromising future sporting commitments and even his career. The news that arrived the following morning, however, surpassed any concern for his personal health. The Fists of Hope event had raised more than triple the initially estimated amount, a sum that would not only cover the complete treatment of all children currently hospitalized in the oncology ward of the National Children's Hospital, but would allow the construction of a new specialized wing, with state-of-the-art equipment and support programs for families. The combination of ticket sales, broadcasting rights, sponsorships, and spontaneous donations resulted in a financial miracle that few believed possible. 3 days after the event, still with his arm immobilized and against medical recommendations, Manny insisted on personally visiting the hospital to symbolically deliver the donation check, being received by an emotional entourage of doctors, nurses, patients, and family members. Among the children present was Maria, the girl of the drawing, who now held a new paper in her hands, the result of her most recent exams, showing a positive response to the treatment that had begun thanks to Manny's anonymous donation weeks earlier, a secret that the boxer would keep forever in his heart. What no one expected, however, was the announcement made by the champion that afternoon. Manny revealed that Fists of Hope would not be an isolated event, but the beginning of a permanent foundation dedicated to treating children with cancer not only in the Philippines, but in developing countries around the world. A significant part of his personal fortune would be allocated to this project, establishing a legacy that would transcend his sporting and political achievements, touching lives for future generations. Months later, during his slow recovery from shoulder surgery, Manny would receive a special visit at his home. Maria, completely recovered and with hair beginning to grow again, brought with her a new drawing, this time depicting not a boxer with gloves, but an ordinary man with a heart bigger than his own body, radiating light to children around him. The true power of Manny Pacquiao, as that child had intuitively understood, was never really in his fists, but in his ability to transform his own pain into hope for those who needed it most, a champion in the deepest and truest sense of the word. If you like this kind of story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next videos.